For 8
losing too
years,
much
a
blood.
Navy SEAL believed his closest
Apply pressure
brother-in-arms
here.
had died in a mission that destroyed
Get him
their
on the
entire
bird
team.
now.
Then a traumatized Belgian Malinois named Nix heard one forgotten whistle and answered with the same military code. Hidden inside the K9's vest was a metal plate, a set of coordinates, and proof that the dead soldier might still be alive. Following Nix meant reopening wounds Gideon had spent years trying to bury. But the deeper they searched, the clearer it became that the explosion had never been an accident. One loyal K9 was carrying the final path to a truth powerful people would do anything to hide. Where are you watching from? And after the story, please share your thoughts, like, and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and create more powerful stories. The first snow of the season began falling over Red Hollow, Montana, shortly before midnight, covering the narrow mountain roads and dark pine branches in a thin layer of white. Beyond the last row of houses stood the Red Hollow Working Dog Rehabilitation Center, a low brick building surrounded by chain-link fencing and security lights that cast pale circles across the frozen ground. Inside, most of the rescued dogs had surrendered to the warmth and silence. Some slept curled beneath blankets, others shifted restlessly whenever the wind rattled the ventilation grates. Only one dog remained sitting upright. Nix was a 5-year-old male Belgian Malinois with a lean, muscular frame, a deep fawn to mahogany coat, and a sharply defined black mask covering his muzzle and the area around his intense, dark amber eyes. His upright ears moved toward every distant sound, yet his body remained unnaturally still. A tan tactical K9 vest covered his chest and back, worn at the edges but carefully secured, while a simple working dog collar rested beneath it. Nix had been found 6 weeks earlier near the abandoned Blackvale radar station, dehydrated, bleeding from one paw, and unwilling to let animal control officers touch the harness around his body. Since arriving at the center, he had never barked for attention, never approached visitors, and never rested with his back toward the northern gate. Every night, no matter where the staff placed his bed, Nix dragged the blanket into the same corner and watched that gate as though waiting for someone to emerge from the snow. Dr. Marin Bell observed him from the hallway with a clipboard pressed against her chest. Marin was 36 of average height, with a healthy, balanced build shaped by years of lifting frightened animals onto examination tables. Her fair skin carried a scattering of freckles across her nose and cheekbones, and her shoulder-length auburn hair was tied low behind her neck. Green eyes gave her a calm, attentive expression, though exhaustion had left faint shadows beneath them. She wore the same practical clothing she used every day: a navy veterinary coat over a light gray crewneck shirt, dark khaki trousers, and brown work shoes. Marin was gentle with animals but direct with people, a quality sharpened by the death of her father, a military rescue pilot whose fatal accident had been explained to the family with a report that answered almost nothing. She had learned that silence could hide fear, negligence, or something worse. Nix's silence troubled her for the same reason. "You cannot keep waiting forever," she whispered. Nix did not look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the gate. The center's review board had given Marin 3 more days to demonstrate that he could be safely rehabilitated. If she failed, Nix would be transferred to a closed security facility where retired working dogs judged too difficult for adoption disappeared behind fences and paperwork. He would receive food and medical care, but he would never belong to anyone again. Several miles away, Gideon Rourke woke with his hand clenched around the edge of his couch. For one confused second, he saw dust instead of snow, a fractured concrete wall instead of the wooden ceiling of his cabin, and orange fire burning through a cloud of desert sand. Then the image broke apart. Gideon released the couch and forced air slowly into his lungs. At 33, he still carried the disciplined athletic build of an active-duty U.S. Navy SEAL, though he had left operational service after the mission that destroyed his team 8 years earlier. His rugged, angular face, sharp jawline, clean-shaven cheeks, and cold blue-gray eyes made him appear harder than he truly was. His dark hair remained cut in a neat modern undercut, with tightly faded sides and a short textured top, because keeping it regulation short was one of the habits he had never abandoned. A narrow scar near his right temple disappeared into his hairline. He wore a complete standard-issue green digital camouflage uniform, the blouse fully buttoned and matched with properly fitted trousers, a plain black belt, and black combat boots. There were no patches, medals, weapons, or tactical equipment on him. Gideon had removed every symbol that invited questions, but he still dressed like a man expecting to be called back into service. He rose and checked the front lock, although he already knew it was secured. Then he checked the window above the sink and the rear door beside the mudroom. The routine embarrassed him, but resisting it made his pulse climb. He had lost Elias Rowe and the rest of his unit in a blast he could never remember clearly. The official report said an enemy device had detonated beneath their route. Gideon remembered only fragments: the metallic click of a radio, Elias shouting his name, an impact that lifted him from the ground, and a white silence that seemed to erase the world. Elias's body had never been recovered. The Navy had eventually declared him dead, and Gideon had spent 8 years pretending the absence of a body did not matter. In daylight, he repaired roofs for elderly veterans, delivered groceries without leaving his name, and helped neighbors who assumed his cold expression meant he preferred to be left alone. At night, he slept on the couch because the bedroom offered only one doorway and no clear view of the windows. The center's heating failure gave him a reason to leave the cabin before dawn. Marin had called the previous evening, explaining that the kennel wing was losing heat. Gideon owed her a favor after she had treated an injured fox he found near the highway, so he loaded his tools into his truck and drove through the snow without asking for payment. By 7, he was kneeling beside an exposed pipe inside the rehabilitation center while Marin held a flashlight. "The pressure valve is sticking," he said. His voice was controlled and low, as if every word had first passed through an internal security check. "I can replace it, but the system will make noise when I restart it." Marin glanced toward the kennels. "Most of them will settle, one may not." Gideon followed her gaze and saw Nix at the far end of the corridor. The Malinois sat in the dimmest enclosure, facing away from them. "Military dog?" Gideon asked. "Probably," Marin replied. "Someone removed the unit identification. We know he was highly trained, but no agency will confirm where he served." Gideon looked away. He had no interest in military mysteries, especially ones with 4 legs and eyes capable of asking questions. As he loosened the damaged valve, a wrench slipped from his fingers. It struck the concrete with a sharp metallic crack. Gideon's body reacted before his mind did. His shoulders locked, his breath vanished, and the corridor became a ruined passageway filled with smoke. Somewhere inside the memory, Elias was shouting. Gideon pressed one hand against the pipe, fighting to remain upright. Without realizing it, he whistled the old rally signal his team had used when radio communication failed. 3 short notes followed by 2 long ones. A sudden scrape came from the final kennel. Nix was standing. The dog moved toward the bars with controlled, deliberate steps. He did not bark or bare his teeth. He stopped within inches of the gate, lowered his head, and placed one front paw against the metal. Marin slowly lowered the flashlight. "He has never done that." Gideon said nothing. His heartbeat had changed for a different reason now. Nix stared directly at him, ears forward, amber eyes searching his face with disciplined intensity. Gideon stepped closer but kept both hands visible and outside the kennel. "That signal could have been used by another unit," Marin said, more to restrain hope than to dismiss it. "A trained dog can remember sounds for years." Gideon nodded, yet something in the dog's posture troubled him. Nix did not look excited. He looked relieved. Gideon crouched near the kennel and studied the scarred edge of Nix's muzzle. "Easy," he said quietly. "I'm not the man you're waiting for." Nix's ears flicked. Gideon did not know why the next name escaped him. Perhaps the dog's stillness reminded him of Elias before a dangerous entry, or perhaps 8 years of buried grief had simply found the first opening it could use. "Elias Rowe," Gideon whispered. Nix released a low, broken sound, unlike a warning or a whine. Then he turned sharply toward the northern gate, struck the kennel floor 3 times with one paw, and returned his eyes to Gideon. 3 impacts, a pause, 2 slower scratches. The exact rhythm of the rally signal. Marin's face lost its color. Gideon felt the corridor tilt beneath him. The dog had not merely recognized the sound. Nix had answered it. Marin unlocked the outer safety partition but did not open the kennel. She approached slowly while Gideon remained at Nix's eye level. The dog allowed her to examine the tan tactical vest, though every muscle along his back stayed tense. Near the inside seam, Marin found a section of thread that did not match the manufacturer's stitching. "This was closed by hand," she said. Using small medical scissors, she opened the seam and removed a thin alloy plate wrapped in faded cloth. 3 letters had been carved into the metal: EMR. Beneath them was a sequence of numbers arranged like geographic coordinates, followed by the old insignia of Gideon's team. His fingers became cold as he accepted the plate. "Elias Rowe," he said. Elias had marked his field tools with those initials because identical equipment was often passed among team members. Gideon turned the plate over, hoping for an explanation, but found only scratches. Marin unfolded the fabric around it. The cloth was dark, stained with old machine oil, and cut from a larger piece. Gideon recognized the weave immediately. During the final mission, he had worn a black oilcloth head wrap beneath his communications gear. Elias had once mocked him for refusing to replace it, saying the thing smelled like an engine compartment. Gideon lifted the cloth toward his face. Time had weakened the scent, but beneath dust and leather remained the unmistakable trace of the lubricant used on their equipment. Marin watched Nix rather than Gideon. "Working dogs can be conditioned to identify a person through scent articles," she said. "This may have been used to teach him your smell." Gideon stared at her. Elias never worked with this dog. Not before the mission, perhaps. The implications settled between them. For Elias to train Nix with Gideon's scent, he would have needed to survive the explosion. He would have needed access to Gideon's cloth, time to prepare the dog, and a reason to believe he could not deliver the message himself. Marin entered the coordinates into her phone. The map loaded slowly in the weak signal. The marker appeared 40 miles north of Red Hollow, inside the restricted grounds surrounding the decommissioned Black Veil radar station, the same area where Nix had been found wandering alone. Gideon looked toward the northern gate. The dog had watched it for 6 weeks because the road beyond it led toward Black Veil. "You do not have to follow this tonight," Marin said. She recognized the tension in his jaw and the slight tremor in the hand holding the plate. "Whatever Elias left there has waited years." Gideon closed his fingers around the metal. For 8 years, he had told himself that searching for answers was another form of refusing to accept death. He had built a life around avoiding sealed reports, old photographs, and men who spoke about sacrifice as though grief were a medal. Yet Nix stood before him as living proof that the past had not finished with either of them. Gideon rose. Nix mirrored the movement and stood at the bars, alert and steady, facing the same direction. "You said the review board gives him 3 days?" Gideon asked. Marin nodded. "Then delay the transfer." "What are you planning?" Gideon looked at the coordinates once more. His expression returned to its usual calm severity, but something warmer and more dangerous had awakened beneath it. "Hope. I'm going to Black Veil," he said. "And I'm finding out why a dead man trained this dog to recognize me." By sunrise, the storm had weakened into a fine curtain of snow, but the road north of Red Hollow remained buried beneath ice and wind-blown drifts. Gideon Rourke stood beside his truck outside the rehabilitation center, studying the coordinates carved into the alloy plate for what might have been the 100th time. He still wore the complete green digital camouflage uniform he had never quite learned to put away. The matching blouse, fully buttoned, fitted trousers, a plain black belt, and polished black combat boots. Without patches, weapons, or tactical equipment, the uniform looked less like preparation for battle and more like a private ritual, the final structure left to a man whose former life had collapsed without warning. Nix waited near the passenger side, the 5-year-old Belgian Malinois steady beneath his tan tactical K9 vest. Snow gathered lightly across his deep fawn to mahogany coat, outlining his black facial mask and upright ears. His dark amber eyes moved between Gideon and the northern road, while his lean, muscular body remained controlled. Marin held the leash, though Nix showed no desire to pull away. "The county approved a limited inspection," she said. Her navy veterinary coat covered the light gray shirt beneath it, and her auburn hair was tied low against the cold. "The Black Veil property is no longer an active military installation, but several underground sections are unstable. Officially, we are checking reports of trapped wildlife." Gideon slid the metal plate into his pocket. "And unofficially, we are following a dog toward a message left by a man declared dead 8 years ago." Her green eyes narrowed. I would prefer not to explain that part to the county commissioner. Before they could leave, Gideon needed someone who understood the old team's communication systems. That meant calling Owen Pike. Owen lived above a radio repair shop near the edge of town, where outdated receivers, weather instruments, and military surplus parts filled every window. He was 45, short and broad through the shoulders, with a sturdy frame softened slightly by years spent behind a workbench. His reddish-brown hair was cropped unevenly, and a thick beard of the same color was carefully trimmed around a square, tired face. Pale green eyes gave him an approachable expression, but they rarely remained still. Owen used humor whenever fear threatened to expose him. A habit that had grown stronger after a training injury kept him away from the team's final deployment. He had spent 8 years wondering whether surviving by accident made him fortunate or guilty. When Gideon placed the alloy plate on the counter, Owen's half-formed joke died before it reached his mouth. He picked it up with both hands, turning it toward the window. EMR, he murmured. Elias marked everything like this: radios, chargers, even his coffee cup. Gideon watched his face. "You know something." Owen returned the plate carefully. 3 weeks after the blast, I caught a weak transmission on one of our retired frequencies, mostly static. There were 2 words I could make out: lantern compromised. Then a voice that sounded like Elias. Gideon felt his jaw tighten. "Why didn't you tell me?" I reported it. Owen's defensive tone quickly collapsed into shame. Command said hostile groups sometimes replayed captured voices to lure recovery teams. They ordered me to classify it as false traffic and wipe the recording. "And you obeyed." Owen stared at the floor. "I thought following procedure might prevent another team from walking into an ambush. I've spent 8 years wondering whether I erased a rescue call instead." The Black Veil radar station lay 40 miles north, beyond a narrow county road twisting through dense pine forest. Its enormous white dome had long ago collapsed, leaving a skeletal framework visible through the trees. Concrete buildings crouched beneath the mountain like abandoned bunkers, their windows boarded and their walls streaked with rust. Marin presented the county authorization at the outer gate, then clipped a long working lead to Nix's simple collar. The Malinois lowered his nose as soon as they entered, sampling the air in short, controlled breaths. He did not charge ahead or behave as though he understood their destination. Instead, he moved between patches of concrete and weeds, pausing wherever old scents clung beneath the snow. Gideon reminded himself of Marin's warning. Nix remembered odors, surfaces, sounds, and fear. He did not remember explanations. Inside the main operations building, their flashlight beams moved over peeling warning signs, damaged control panels, and animal tracks preserved in dust. Owen carried a compact diagnostic case, muttering that the place looked exactly like the kind of building where sensible people got buried. Nix ignored 2 open corridors, but repeatedly returned to a third, where a faint petroleum odor drifted from beneath a sealed fire door. Marin removed the fabric found in his vest and held it several feet away. Nix briefly checked the scent, then faced the same corridor again. "Similar odor profile," she said. "Old machinery oil, possibly the same compound. That does not prove Elias was here, but it explains what Nix is following." Gideon pushed the fire door open. Beyond it, a narrow stairway descended beneath the station. At the bottom stood a heavy steel door welded around its frame. Scratches marked the lower edge, some narrow and parallel enough to have been made by a dog's claws. Nix approached, sniffed once, then backed away with his tail held rigid. His reluctance disturbed Gideon more than excitement would have. The dog knew the place, and whatever he associated with it had taught him caution. Gideon examined the locking mechanism. "We can cut through." Owen crouched beside a conduit entering the wall and wiped dust from the insulation. "Not from here." He pointed to a thin wire connected to the door frame. "This runs inside. Could be an alarm. Could trigger a fire charge designed to destroy whatever is behind the door." Marin looked at the scratches. "Then how did Elias get in?" Nix turned away from the steel door and paced along the corridor, nose near the floor. He stopped over a rectangular maintenance panel, almost hidden beneath fallen insulation. When he placed one paw on it, something clicked below them. A weak amber light appeared along the wall. Owen stepped back, raising both hands, as an old speaker crackled overhead. Static poured into the corridor, followed by 3 uneven breaths. Then, a man's voice emerged, older, strained, but unmistakable. "Gideon, if Nix brought you here, he made it home." Gideon stopped breathing. Elias's voice had lived in his nightmares for 8 years, usually shouting through fire. Now it came quietly from the wall. "Do not open the main door. The storage chamber is rigged to burn. The access route is below the Western Service Tunnel." Static swallowed several words. Then Elias returned, weaker. "Do not trust the final mission report. Lantern was compromised from inside. I tried to—" The recording fractured. A last sentence struggled through the noise. "The dog remembers the way, not the reason. Trust what he recognizes, but do not ask him to carry the truth alone." The amber light died. Nix remained over the pressure panel, ears angled toward the silent speaker. Gideon pressed a hand against the concrete wall, fighting the sudden certainty that the dead did not leave instructions unless they had survived long enough to understand the danger. Owen opened the maintenance panel and found a pressure switch wired to an isolated battery unit. "Recorded message," he said softly. "No live transmission. Elias built it to activate only when weight hit this plate." Marin looked at Nix. "A person might step anywhere. A trained dog could be conditioned to stop here." Gideon heard the restraint in her explanation, but the logic did little to soften the emotion. Elias had planned for Nix to return. He had trusted the dog to preserve a path through time when every official channel had failed. The Western Service Tunnel began behind a rusted ventilation cabinet. Owen removed the bolts, revealing an opening barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. Cold air flowed from the darkness. Nix entered first under Marin's control, his vest brushing the metal sides. Gideon followed, then Marin, while Owen brought up the rear with the diagnostic case. The passage narrowed after 20 feet. Metal pressed close to Gideon's shoulders, and the smell of rust transformed into smoke and scorched wiring. His rational mind knew he was beneath a Montana radar station. His body believed he was trapped beneath collapsed concrete in Afghanistan. His chest tightened. The flashlight trembled in his hand. Ahead, the tunnel became a broken trench filled with desert dust, and Elias's voice called from somewhere Gideon could not reach. "I can't move," Gideon said, the admission scraping his throat. Marin's voice came from behind him. "Do not fight the entire memory. Find one thing that belongs here." Nix, several feet ahead, turned around. The dog crawled back until his black-masked face filled Gideon's light. Instead of pushing past, Nix lowered himself onto the cold metal and breathed steadily, eyes fixed on Gideon. In. Pause. Out. His ears remained upright, but his body softened enough to show he was waiting rather than guarding. Gideon placed one palm against the floor and matched the dog's rhythm. The walls slowly returned to steel. The dust became condensation. The distant shouting faded into the sound of Marin breathing behind him. "Good," she said. "Follow Nix, not the memory." Gideon moved again. They emerged into a hidden technical room behind the welded door. Dust covered a folding cot, shelves of medical supplies, and several damaged storage drives. Satellite photographs of military convoys were pinned to the wall. A burned communications console occupied the center of the room, beside bottles of medication labeled for seizures and nerve pain. The place did not resemble a temporary hideout. Someone had lived there long enough to require treatment. Owen connected a portable power source to the console. Most of these drives are cooked, but one controller is responding. Gideon searched the room and found a faded bandage wrapper stamped with a date, 7 months after the explosion. Elias had not merely survived for a few hours or days. He had remained alive long after Gideon returned home. The realization brought relief, anger, and betrayal in equal measure. Why had Elias hidden? Who had injured him? Why send a dog instead of coming back himself? Nix wandered toward the cot, sniffed the blanket, and suddenly pressed his nose into its folded edge. A quiet sound escaped him. Not panic, recognition mixed with grief. Gideon knelt, but did not touch him. Elias's recorded warning returned to him. "Do not ask the dog to carry the truth alone." A sharp electronic tone broke the silence. One of the dead monitors flickered to life beside Owen. Green letters appeared against the black screen. Access detected. Remote user connected. Owen's hands froze above the controls. "That isn't from the old recording." A cursor moved across the screen without his input. Someone was navigating the station's system from another location. Marin shortened Nix's lead. Gideon stepped closer as a directory opened, then began deleting itself line by line. "They know we're here," Owen said. The cursor stopped. A small camera icon appeared at the top of the display. On a second monitor, a grainy image formed the four of them standing inside the hidden room. The remote user zoomed past Marin and Owen, centered on Gideon's face, and held there. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then every monitor went black. The monitors went black at the same moment, leaving the hidden room beneath black veil illuminated only by their flashlights and the weak emergency lamp attached to Owen Pike's equipment case. For several seconds, nobody moved. Gideon Rourke stared at his own reflection in the dead screen, his angular face reduced to a pale shape surrounded by darkness. The remote user had ignored Marin, Owen, and even Nix. Whoever had been watching had deliberately centered the camera on Gideon. That choice felt more threatening than any spoken warning. "Disconnect everything," Gideon said. His voice remained controlled, but the muscles along his jaw had tightened. Owen pulled the external cable from the console, then reached behind the monitor and tore loose an aging network line. "They were already inside before I connected power," he said. "The room must have a secondary communications circuit, probably a low-bandwidth maintenance link running through another building. The main station can be abandoned while one hidden system stays alive." Marin shortened Nix's lead. The Belgian Malinois stood beside her with his upright ears angled toward the corridor. His deep fawn-to-mahogany coat rose slightly along his shoulders, and his dark amber eyes moved between the welded door and the ventilation passage. The dog did not understand computer systems, but he understood the tension spreading through the room. "If they saw us," Marin said, "they may send someone." Gideon nodded. "Then we take what we can and leave before they arrive." Owen worked quickly, opening the damaged console with a screwdriver and removing its internal storage components. Most of the drives were blackened by heat, but one solid-state module had been shielded inside a metal housing. Owen wrapped it in an anti-static bag and placed it inside his case. Gideon searched the shelves, while Marin photographed the room without moving objects unnecessarily. They found medicine bottles, a stained field blanket, outdated satellite maps, and a medical dressing wrapper printed with a date 7 months after Elias Rowe had officially died. Each item strengthened the possibility that someone had occupied the room long after the final mission, but none of them alone proved it was Elias. Gideon understood that distinction intellectually. Emotionally, the date felt like an accusation. For 7 months after Gideon had been sent home, decorated, questioned, and eventually discharged from operational duty, Elias might have been alive somewhere beyond the reach of every official search. Nix moved to a low cabinet near the cot. He sniffed the door, then sat rather than pawing at it. Marin recognized the trained indication and opened the cabinet carefully. Inside lay several sealed envelopes, an empty identification sleeve, and a photograph folded twice through the center. Gideon unfolded it beneath the flashlight. The image showed 3 men standing beside a cargo vehicle in a dry military compound. One was unmistakably Elias. He appeared thinner than Gideon remembered, with a scar rising from the left side of his collar and fatigue carved beneath his eyes, but he was upright and alive. The date printed on the corner was nearly 9 months after the explosion. Standing several feet behind him was Silas Vane. At the time the picture was taken, Silas had been a military logistics officer, responsible for coordinating equipment transfers between field commands and private contractors. He was already tall and narrow, with a long, clean-shaven face, high cheekbones, and steel-gray eyes that seemed detached even in a poor photograph. His silvering hair had been combed straight back, and his uniform sat perfectly on his frame. Gideon remembered him as unfailingly polite, the kind of officer who never raised his voice because paperwork, rank, and other men's fear did the work for him. Silas had briefed Gideon's team the night before their last deployment. Gideon turned the photograph over. Written on the back were 4 words in Elias's compact handwriting. "The convoy was never ours." Nick suddenly leaned forward and pressed his nose to Elias's image. His body went still. Then, instead of whining or scratching, the dog lowered himself onto the concrete and rested his chin directly beneath the photograph in Gideon's hand. The gesture was quiet, almost ceremonial. Gideon felt something inside him give way. Until that moment, every clue could still have been a trap built from fragments of his grief. But Nix's recognition was not proof for a court or an investigator. It was something more personal and more dangerous, a living memory. Gideon looked at Elias's face in the photograph and understood that his friend had not vanished in the blast. Elias had survived long enough to become part of another story one someone had worked hard to erase. "You knew him," Gideon whispered. Nix lifted his dark amber eyes but did not rise. Gideon folded the photograph carefully. "Then we find out who kept him from coming home." A distant metallic impact echoed through the ventilation shaft. Gideon raised one hand, signaling silence. Another sound followed from above the heavy closure of an exterior door. They had no way to know whether it was wind, shifting structure, or someone entering the station. Gideon refused to gamble. Owen carried the storage module, Marin guided Nix, and the group retreated through the maintenance tunnel. Gideon went last, forcing himself to move despite the tight walls. This time, he focused on the rhythmic sound of Nix's vest brushing against metal ahead of him. The dog's presence did not remove the memory, but it gave Gideon something real to follow through it. They emerged into the upper corridor and found fresh snow blowing through the main entrance. No person was visible, but tire tracks crossed the station yard. The tracks were too sharp to have survived the night's snowfall and did not match Gideon's truck. Someone had recently driven to the opposite side of the complex. "We leave now," he said. They were halfway to the outer gate when two dark government vehicles appeared on the access road. Gideon stopped beside the truck rather than attempting to flee. Running would only make them look guilty, and he had no intention of leaving the recovered evidence behind. 4 people stepped from the vehicles. 3 wore plain winter jackets and moved with the measured caution of federal investigators. The 4th was a woman in her early 40s with a slender but fit build, warm brown skin, and a sharply defined face that revealed little emotion. Straight black hair fell neatly to her shoulders. Her dark brown eyes studied the group with immediate precision. She wore a charcoal blazer beneath a long winter coat, a white blouse, black trousers, and low black leather shoes unsuitable for deep snow but perfectly suited to an office where details mattered more than comfort. A small federal credential rested at her belt. "Gideon Rourke?" she asked. "Who wants to know?" "Special Agent Naomi Vale, Office of Inspector General, Department of Defense." Her voice was even and restrained. Naomi had built her career investigating procurement fraud and contract manipulation, work that demanded patience more than force. Years earlier, one of her witnesses had died before testifying in a case connected to military shipping routes. Since then, she trusted documentation more than promises and procedure more than intuition. This facility generated an access alert tied to a restricted archive. "I need to know why a former Navy SEAL, a veterinarian, and a civilian communications specialist are inside a county-controlled radar station." Gideon did not answer immediately. Naomi's attention shifted to Nix, then to the alloy plate visible in Gideon's hand. The letters EMR changed her expression by only a fraction, but Gideon saw it. "You know those initials," he said. Naomi looked toward her investigators. "Secure the perimeter. Nobody enters the underground section until we assess structural and electronic hazards." When they moved away, she faced Gideon again. "Elias Rowe contacted my office 8 years ago." The name struck the cold air between them. Owen stepped closer. "About Project Lantern?" Naomi's eyes moved to him. "Where did you hear that name?" "From a transmission I was ordered to erase." Naomi's professional composure tightened. She led them into a disused guard building near the gate, where Marin photographed every item before Owen placed the recovered module on a metal desk. Naomi listened without interruption as they described Nix, the coordinates, the pressure-triggered recording, the hidden room, and the remote deletion. She did not immediately accept their conclusions. Instead, she asked exact questions. Who touched each item? Whether Owen had modified the drive, whether the county authorization covered underground access, and whether anyone had copied the files. Gideon became impatient. "Elias was alive 9 months after the explosion. We have a dated photograph." Naomi examined it carefully. "You have an image that appears to show him. I believe it may be genuine, But belief is not authentication. You sound like the officers who declared him dead. And you sound like a man who has waited 8 years for one piece of evidence to confirm what he wants to be true. Her tone remained calm, though regret flickered beneath it. That does not make you wrong. It means we proceed carefully enough that whoever did this cannot destroy the case in court. She revealed that Elias had once tried to report irregular transfers involving military communications equipment, specialized detonators, and private security contractors. His information pointed toward a network of shell companies, but he disappeared before delivering the full records. Naomi opened a preliminary investigation. Within weeks, a financial witness died in a vehicle accident. Several documents were reclassified, and Naomi was reassigned. She had suspected interference, but never obtained enough evidence to identify who controlled it. Owen connected the recovered module to an isolated forensic laptop supplied by Naomi's team. Most of its directory had been erased remotely, but fragments remained in unallocated storage. He recovered shipment manifests, showing that Gideon's final mission route had been changed less than 6 hours before deployment. Their team had been sent to inspect a road used by a convoy that did not exist in the official schedule. Additional fragments listed American-made triggering components transferred from a military depot to a contractor controlled through multiple intermediary companies. One scanned report contained Elias's name beside a complaint marked unresolved. Another contained a row of coded patient numbers. Naomi searched one code through a secure government database. It linked to Haven Crest Recovery Center, a privately operated neurological rehabilitation facility in Washington state. The facility received federal money to treat unidentified or cognitively impaired veterans. One patient had no public name. His records listed a rare blood type matching Elias, a surgically repaired left shoulder injured years before his disappearance, and dental characteristics consistent with his service records. Several fingers were too damaged to provide a complete fingerprint comparison. Marin leaned toward the screen. That is not enough to confirm identity. No, Naomi said. But it is enough to request a formal administrative review. Gideon stared at the patient's admission date. It came after the photograph at Black Veil. How long has he been there? Naomi scrolled through the restricted summary. According to this, almost 7 years. Silence filled the guard building. Nix moved closer to Gideon's leg, not because he understood the record, but because Gideon's breathing had changed. A warning appeared on Naomi's laptop. Someone had attempted to access the same Haven Crest file from another location seconds after she opened it. Naomi immediately disconnected the system. The archive is monitored, she said. Whoever erased Black Veil is watching connected records. Then they know we found Haven Crest, Gideon replied. Possibly. Possibly isn't good enough. It will have to be until we establish facts. Naomi packed the forensic laptop into its case. We cannot storm a medical center based on a dog's reaction, a damaged photograph, and partial metadata. I need an inspection order, a review of their federal contracts, and a legally protected evidence chain. Gideon stepped closer. And while you file requests, they move him. Naomi held his gaze. She had spent 8 years regretting how slowly the system had moved the first time. Gideon saw that guilt beneath her discipline. You are right about one thing, she said. We do not have the luxury of delay. She instructed her team to preserve the Black Veil site and begin authenticating the drive. Then she turned to Gideon, Marin, and Owen. I'm traveling to Washington to open an emergency compliance investigation at Haven Crest. Dr. Bell comes because Nix may provide behavioral and scent context, not because the dog is evidence by himself. Pike remains available to assist the forensic team. Gideon looked toward Owen. The former communications specialist nodded despite the fear in his pale green eyes. I'll recover whatever they missed, Naomi continued. Rourke, you may come as a civilian witness, but you follow my instructions. No unauthorized entry, no confrontation, and no treating suspicion as proof. Gideon looked down at Nix. The Malinois stood alert beside him. Black mask pointed toward the northwest as though the scent of an old promise waited beyond the mountains. I'll follow the evidence, Gideon said. Naomi closed her case. Then be ready before dawn. Outside, snow began covering the unfamiliar tire tracks at Black Veil. By morning, the evidence that someone else had visited might be gone. But for the first time in 8 years, Gideon possessed more than grief and a missing body. He had a photograph, a patient code, and a destination. Somewhere in Washington, behind the walls of Haven Crest, a nameless man carried wounds that matched Elias Rowe, and someone had just been warned that Gideon was coming. Haven Crest Recovery Center stood beyond a wall of cedar trees in western Washington, hidden beneath a sky that seemed permanently gray. Rain coated the narrow access road, darkened the stone buildings, and turned the surrounding forest into a deep green maze. From the highway, the facility looked more like an expensive private retreat than a medical institution. Its main building had wide windows, landscaped courtyards, and a polished brass sign promising dignity, recovery, and renewed independence for injured veterans. Gideon Rourke distrusted it immediately. Places built to appear peaceful often worked hardest to conceal what happened beyond public view. He sat in the passenger seat of Naomi Vale's government vehicle, wearing the same complete green digital camouflage uniform that had become part armor and part habit. A fully buttoned matching blouse, properly fitted trousers, a plain black belt, and black combat boots. No rank, insignia, weapon, or protective equipment identified his former service, but his disciplined posture and cold blue-gray eyes still marked him as a man trained to examine threats before comforts. Nix occupied the rear compartment beside Marin Bell. The 5-year-old Belgian Malinois remained alert beneath his tan tactical K9 vest, his lean muscular body balanced against every turn. His deep fawn to mahogany coat was damp from the morning rain, his black facial mask emphasizing the intensity of his dark amber eyes. Since leaving Montana, Nix had rested only in brief intervals. Each time the vehicle stopped, he woke immediately and tested the air. Naomi parked near the administration entrance and reviewed the boundaries of the investigation one final time. Her charcoal blazer, white blouse, black trousers, and low black leather shoes remained immaculate despite the weather. Her straight black hair rested neatly at her shoulders, framing a sharply defined face that rarely revealed uncertainty. The Emergency Compliance Order permits access to federal billing records, public treatment areas, pharmacy logs tied to government contracts, and any patient whose care is funded through the disputed companies, she said. It does not permit us to force entry into sealed wards without additional cause. Gideon looked at the western wing, a long concrete structure partly hidden behind trees. Several windows had been painted opaque from the inside. And if they move Elias while you ask permission, then we establish a lawful reason to stop them. Naomi met his gaze. Silas Vane has survived investigations because people became impatient and gave him procedural weaknesses to exploit. Do not become one. The facility administrator greeted them in the lobby. Dr. Everett Klein was a thin man in his late 50s, with silver hair combed precisely over a high forehead, narrow shoulders, and frameless glasses resting above pale, watchful eyes. He wore a dark blue suit under a white medical coat, an unnecessary combination that made him look more like a corporate representative than a physician. His smile was practiced, his voice soft, and his irritation carefully hidden beneath professional concern. Haven Crest welcomes oversight, he said after examining Naomi's documents. However, many of our patients suffer from severe cognitive trauma. Unexpected uniforms, unfamiliar animals, and aggressive questioning may destabilize them. His gaze lingered on Gideon, especially military imagery. Gideon heard the accusation beneath the courtesy. I'm not here to question patients. Then perhaps the uniform is an unfortunate choice. Gideon did not answer. Klein's eyes shifted away first. Marin was permitted to evaluate Haven Crest's animal-assisted therapy program because federal funds supported it. She kept Nix on a short working lead as they crossed the central rehabilitation hall. Veterans sat in group therapy rooms, exercised with physical therapists, and worked on coordination tasks beneath warm lights. The visible part of Haven Crest appeared legitimate. Staff members spoke gently, equipment was modern, and several patients greeted Nix with hesitant smiles. That normality disturbed Marin more than obvious cruelty would have. A real medical program could provide the perfect cover for something hidden inside it. Nix accepted the presence of the patients, but remained focused. Near the Eastern Therapy Garden, he relaxed slightly. Near the pharmacy corridor, his ears flattened and his breathing quickened. The strong disinfectant smell alone could have triggered his response, so Marin guided him away and waited until his posture settled. "He is not giving us directions," she reminded Gideon. "He is reacting to associations. We cannot assume every place that frightens him contains Elias." Gideon nodded, though patience felt like a chain around his chest. Naomi and her auditors reviewed financial records in the administration office. Several government-funded patients were listed only by numerical identifiers. Klein explained that the codes protected unidentified veterans whose injuries prevented reliable identification, yet the files lacked the usual evidence of efforts to locate family members, coordinate with veterans agencies, or establish guardianship. 3 patients had been receiving expensive neurological treatment for years through private insurers that shared the same mailing address. In the pharmacy, Marin noticed that sedative use was far higher than the number of visible patients appeared to justify. A small woman arranging medication trays watched her count the locked cabinets. The woman was Ruth Calder, Haven Crest's 58-year-old head nurse. Ruth stood barely 5 feet 3, with a slight frame, pale skin, and a tired, gentle face marked by fine lines around her mouth. Her short gray hair was combed neatly behind her ears, and her faded blue eyes carried the nervous attentiveness of someone who had spent years listening for footsteps. She wore light blue nursing scrubs, white medical shoes, and a modest name badge. Ruth had entered nursing because her younger brother returned from Vietnam unable to sleep or recognize safety. She believed wounded service members deserved patience when the rest of the world found them inconvenient. That belief had kept her at Haven Crest long after fear told her to leave. Ruth passed Marin a sealed medication tray, then whispered without moving her lips, "Do not ask about the West Building in front of cameras." Marin felt her pulse change, but kept her expression neutral. "This dosage is unusually high." "Storage room," Ruth said aloud. "Second door on the right. I can show you the older records." Inside the narrow storage room, Ruth closed the door and placed one trembling finger against her lips. Before she could speak, Nix turned toward a ventilation grill near the floor. He drew in one sharp breath, then another. His entire body became rigid. A faint metallic sound traveled through the duct 3 taps, a pause, then 2 slower taps. Gideon froze. It was the same rhythm as the old rally signal. Nix lowered his head and answered by striking the floor once with his paw, but Marin immediately restrained him from repeating it. Ruth's face drained of color. "One of the men in the West Wing does that at night," she whispered. "He taps on the radiator when the medication begins to wear off. 3 short, 2 long. We thought it was meaningless." Gideon stepped toward the grill, hope and dread colliding inside him. Somewhere behind the walls, a man had been repeating the signal of Gideon's lost team for years. Ruth revealed that Haven Crest's Western Wing did not appear on the public floor plan. It was officially classified as a temporary neurological research unit, but several patients had remained there for years without court-appointed guardians or verified identities. They were heavily medicated, prohibited from receiving visitors, and moved whenever inspectors arrived. Ruth initially believed the secrecy protected intelligence personnel. Her doubts began when patients who regained memory were given higher doses instead of access to family. 2 years earlier, a neurologist named Dr. Samuel Greer tried to report falsified consent forms. Greer died when his car left a mountain road during clear weather. Haven Crest called it an accident. Ruth found his copied notes missing the following morning. Since then, she had quietly duplicated medication schedules and transfer records, hiding them behind a removable panel in the pharmacy. "Why didn't you leave?" Gideon asked, unable to keep judgment from his voice. Ruth's eyes filled with shame. "Because leaving would have protected me, not them. And speaking without evidence might have made them disappear." She looked toward Nix. The dog was here. They called him Atlas. He belonged to the man who taps. Marin's grip tightened around the leash. "When did Nix leave?" "About 6 weeks ago. A maintenance worker helped get him out. The next morning, the Western Wing was locked down, and the worker vanished." Ruth handed Naomi copies of medication records and a transfer sheet listing 3 numbered patients scheduled to leave Haven Crest that evening. One code matched the patient file connected to Elias. Naomi needed Ruth to provide a signed statement before she could request an expanded search order. Ruth stared at the document, her hands shaking so badly that the paper rustled. If I sign this, they will know. They may already know we are here, Naomi replied. Her voice softened. But once you sign, you become a protected federal witness. Remaining silent no longer guarantees your safety. A tone sounded over the facility intercom. Dr. Klein's voice announced that an ambulance transfer had been moved forward due to an incoming storm. Ruth looked at the clock. They were not supposed to leave until midnight. Gideon moved toward the western corridor. Naomi blocked him, not without lawful access. They're taking him now, and if you force entry, Klein calls it an assault by an unstable veteran. Silas wins before we identify the patient. Nix suddenly turned toward the rear loading area. An orderly pushed a covered medical cart past the intersection, carrying folded blankets toward a white transport vehicle. The dog pulled once, sharply, then stopped under Marin's command. His nose remained pointed toward one blanket hanging over the side. Marin approached under the pretense of examining the therapy dog supplies. The fabric carried the same mixture of antiseptic, machine oil, and human scent that Nix had followed at Black Veil. This gives us behavioral cause to observe, she said quietly, not legal cause to search. Ruth finally took Naomi's pen. Then use my statement. She signed. Naomi transmitted the affidavit to a federal magistrate and contacted State Patrol while the white transport vehicle left Haven Crest. The expanded order would take time, but the ambulance itself presented immediate irregularities. Its registration belonged to a discontinued medical contractor, and Haven Crest had filed no patient transfer notice. Naomi asked State Patrol to conduct a safety and licensing stop at the next commercial way station. The group followed at a distance through heavy rain. Gideon sat rigid, watching the vehicle's taillights. Every instinct told him to close the distance, force it off the road, and open the doors himself. Instead, he held the alloy plate in one hand and kept the other near Nix's shoulder. The dog's steady presence reminded him that reaching Elias was not enough. They had to bring him into the light without giving Silas a way to bury the truth again. State Patrol units stopped the transport 20 miles from Haven Crest. The driver could not produce valid transfer documents. Naomi arrived with the signed affidavit and opened the rear doors under the authority of the emergency medical inspection. 3 patients lay secured to wheeled stretchers. All appeared heavily sedated. The first was an elderly man with white hair. The second was a younger veteran, missing part of one leg. The third lay beneath a gray blanket with his face turned toward the wall. Nix saw him and changed. The Malinois did not bark or lunge. His hind legs weakened, and he lowered himself almost to the wet pavement. A sound emerged from his throat, raw and broken, unlike anything Gideon had heard from him. Marin loosened the lead enough for Nix to approach slowly. The third patient was a tall man reduced by illness to a narrow frame. His hair, once dark blonde, had turned prematurely silver and had been cut unevenly around a long, exhausted face. Pale scar tissue climbed from the left side of his neck toward his jaw. Sparse blonde-gray stubble covered his cheeks, and his left hand trembled against the restraint strap. He appeared older than 42, not from time alone, but from years spent without sunlight, choice, or hope. Nix placed his black-masked muzzle against the man's hand. The patient's fingers moved. His eyelids opened, revealing light brown eyes clouded by medication. He did not look at Gideon, Naomi, or the officers. He looked only at the dog. "Atlas," he whispered. Nix pressed closer, trembling from nose to tail. The man's gaze slowly shifted toward Gideon. For one brief second, awareness cut through the sedation. His fingers closed weakly around Nix's collar. "You," he breathed. "You weren't supposed to survive." Then his eyes rolled shut. Gideon stood in the rain, unable to move. The voice was damaged, the face altered, and 8 years had carved away nearly everything familiar. But beneath the scars, Gideon recognized the shape of the brow, the old break in the bridge of the nose, and the man who had once called him a brother. Naomi ordered the patients transferred to a protected federal hospital. "We do not identify him publicly until forensic comparison is complete," she warned. Gideon barely heard her. Nix walked beside the stretcher as paramedics moved it to a state ambulance, refusing to let the man leave his sight. For 8 years, Gideon had searched his memories for the moment Elias died. Now the question was no longer how Elias had been killed. It was what had been done to keep him alive. The Federal Medical Wing occupied the upper floors of an ordinary hospital in a cell outside Tacoma, hidden behind tinted windows, restricted elevators, and security officers dressed to look like visitors. Rain traced silver lines down the glass, while Gideon Rourke stood outside Elias Rowe's room, watching doctors move around the man he had mourned for 8 years. The face beyond the window was altered by scars, medication, and prolonged illness, but small details remained untouched. The old break along the bridge of the nose, the slight rise of the left eyebrow, and the narrow line beside the mouth that deepened whenever Elias tried to hide pain. Gideon wore his complete green digital camouflage uniform, the matching blouse buttoned neatly over a disciplined athletic frame, properly fitted trousers held by a plain black belt, and black combat boots planted squarely against the polished floor. He carried no weapon, patches, armor, or extra equipment. The uniform drew occasional looks from hospital staff, but removing it would have felt like surrendering the last structure holding him together. Nix lay beside the door in his tan tactical K9 vest, his lean muscular body stretched across the floor. The 5-year-old Belgian Malinois had refused food until Elias was stabilized. Now his upright ears reacted to every voice coming from inside, while his dark amber eyes remained fixed on the bed. Naomi Vale approached carrying a sealed folder. Her charcoal blazer and white blouse were immaculate, but the fatigue beneath her dark brown eyes revealed that she had not slept. "The preliminary identification is complete," she said. Gideon did not turn from the window. "Preliminary means you still doubt what we saw. It means I will not let Silas Vane's attorneys destroy this case because we became careless." She opened the folder. Military dental records matched 11 distinctive points. Elias's blood type was the same rare subtype listed in his service file. An old surgical repair in his left shoulder contained hardware with a serial number tied to a Navy medical procedure performed 14 years earlier. A healed fracture in his right hand matched an injury Gideon remembered from training. Damaged fingertips prevented a complete print comparison, but surviving ridge details supported the identification. "It is him," Naomi said. "Legally and medically, we have enough to confirm Elias Rowe is alive." The words should have brought relief. Instead, Gideon felt anger rising beneath it. Elias had been alive while memorial services were held, while families folded flags, while Gideon woke each night believing he had failed everyone. Somewhere inside him, a wounded part demanded an explanation Elias might not be capable of giving. "Why didn't he come back?" Gideon asked. Naomi looked through the glass. "We do not know whether he ever had that choice." Dr. Marin Bell joined them after consulting with the medical team. Her auburn hair was tied low, and her Navy veterinary coat remained over her light gray shirt and dark khaki trousers, because she had spent the night monitoring Nix as closely as the hospital monitored Elias. They found evidence of long-term sedative exposure, poorly managed seizure medication, and neurological trauma, she explained. "His memories may return in fragments, but those fragments may not arrive in order. Do not treat every sentence as a complete account." Gideon finally looked at her. "He recognized me. He reacted to you. Recognition and coherent memory are not always the same thing." When Elias woke, Gideon entered alone, except for Nix. Elias appeared painfully thin beneath a pale gray, long-sleeved hospital shirt. Dark, simple trousers and brown slip-on shoes provided after the staff removed Haven Crest's clothing. His dark blonde hair had turned heavily silver and was cut unevenly around his long, exhausted face. Sparse blonde-gray stubble covered his hollow cheeks. Pale burn scars climbed from the left side of his neck toward his jaw, while his left hand trembled beneath the blanket. His light brown eyes followed Nix first. "Atlas," Elias whispered. Nix approached in slow, deliberate steps. He sniffed Elias's hand, but stopped before touching it. The odor of antiseptic and medication made the dog's ears tilt backward. Gideon interpreted the hesitation as rejection until Marin, watching from the doorway, quietly reminded him that Nix associated hospital smells with confinement. Elias lowered his hand rather than forcing contact. "Still asking permission," he murmured, as though recalling a training lesson from another life. "His name is Nix now," Gideon said. Elias looked toward him. For a moment, his eyes sharpened. "Rourke." Gideon's chest tightened. "You know me?" "I know." Elias pressed his fingers against his temple. Stone, heat. You wouldn't stop talking about coffee. A brief laugh escaped Gideon before he could stop it. Elias had once complained that Gideon could turn any mission into a search for decent coffee. The memory was real, but then Elias's expression clouded. "Where is the road?" he asked. "We have to move the convoy before Vane sees the manifest." "You're in Washington," Gideon said. "The mission was 8 years ago." Elias stared at him with sudden fear. "No, it was yesterday." His breathing accelerated. Nix backed away at the change in his voice. Gideon stepped forward, but Marin raised a hand. "Do not argue with the memory. Anchor him." Gideon forced his own urgency down. "You're in a hospital. It is raining outside. Nix is here." "I am here." Elias looked toward the window, listened to the rain, then slowly settled against the pillow. The first interviews produced more confusion than answers. Elias remembered Black Veil but believed it was in Afghanistan. He remembered Silas standing beside a transport aircraft, then insisted the aircraft was buried underground. He recalled teaching Nix to recognize Gideon's scent, but could not say whether that happened months or years earlier. Each effort exhausted him. Naomi recorded the sessions, but refused to treat them as formal testimony. Outside the room, Gideon's frustration turned inward. He was my commander. He could walk through an explosion and organize everyone else before checking whether he was bleeding. Now, he cannot remember which country he is in. Marin folded her arms. He survived 8 years of people controlling his medication, environment, and identity. Survival may be the only mission he completed every day. Gideon looked at Nix, who had positioned himself halfway between Elias's door and Gideon's feet. The dog seemed unwilling to choose between the man he had known and the man he had been sent to find. That afternoon, Elias began struggling against the blanket during a nightmare. His voice was low and broken, repeating numbers no one understood. Nix stood abruptly but did not approach the bed. Instead, he moved to the far wall and struck the floor 3 times with one paw, paused, then scraped twice more. Gideon answered instinctively with the familiar whistle. 3 short notes, too long. Elias's eyes opened. The panic vanished for a single startling second. He lifted his trembling left hand and completed the sequence by tapping 4 quick beats against the bed rail. Nix immediately crossed the room and placed his head beneath Elias's palm. Tears filled Elias's light brown eyes. "Not a rally call," he whispered. "First half of the key." Then he looked directly at Gideon. "Your father hid the rest where the light stopped turning." The clarity disappeared almost immediately. Elias asked why Gideon's father had not come to visit, forgetting that the man had died 12 years earlier. Yet the new phrase changed the investigation. Gideon's father, Nathan Rourke, had been a naval communications engineer who designed hardened relay systems before retiring. Gideon had always believed his work was unrelated to field operations. Naomi began requesting his archived contracts. Ruth Calder arrived under federal protection later that evening. The 58-year-old nurse appeared even smaller outside Haven Crest, her pale face drawn with fear beneath short gray hair. She wore the same light blue scrubs and white medical shoes in which she had signed her statement, though a borrowed raincoat covered her shoulders. Ruth confirmed that Elias had experienced brief periods of clarity whenever his medication was reduced. During those periods, he trained Nix, then called Atlas, to stop at specific scents, respond to sound patterns, and locate hidden objects. He never expected the dog to explain anything, Ruth said. He said Atlas only needed to reach the right person. "How did Nix get out?" Naomi asked. "A maintenance worker helped him. Caleb Dunn." Caleb was 31, a former Army vehicle mechanic who had been wounded during a roadside attack in Iraq. Ruth described him as a lean, capable man with light brown hair cut short, hazel eyes, a small scar through his left eyebrow, and permanent stiffness in his right knee. He wore a blue-gray maintenance shirt, charcoal work trousers, and worn brown boots. Caleb had accepted the Haven Crest job because he wanted to repair equipment for veterans like himself. His reserved manner made administrators underestimate him, but his sense of responsibility had survived the war intact. Caleb discovered locked treatment rooms while repairing ventilation controls. Elias eventually persuaded him that the patients were being held without valid consent. 6 weeks earlier, Caleb hid Nix in a supply vehicle, drove toward Black Veil, and released him near the access road with the vest and alloy plate. He planned to return for records, but disappeared before Ruth could contact him again. "Do you think Silas found him?" Gideon asked. Ruth lowered her eyes. "I think Caleb knew they were watching. He told me that if he stopped coming to work, I should not believe anything written in his resignation." Naomi ordered a protective search for Caleb and added his name to the federal witness system. The information also explained why Nix had been found dehydrated near Black Vale rather than directly at Red Hollow. Caleb had only been able to get him close to the first programmed location. From there, Nix followed scent and learned routes until animal control intervened. By the next morning, Silas's legal response had begun. A national news segment described Gideon as an emotionally unstable former SEAL who had interfered with medical care and pressured a cognitively impaired patient. The Haven Crest attorney claimed Elias had received compassionate treatment under confidential federal authorization. Reporters gathered outside the hospital. One shouted that Gideon was exploiting a war dog to support a conspiracy theory. Gideon turned so quickly that 2 security officers moved forward. Rage tightened every muscle in his body. Before he could step toward the reporter, Nix positioned himself across Gideon's path. The dog did not growl. He simply stood broadside, looking up at him. Gideon saw what he was becoming, exactly the image Silas needed. He lowered his hands and walked back inside. Later, Elias was strong enough for another brief conversation. Naomi placed a photograph of Nathan Rourke on the table. Elias touched it with one shaking finger. "He found the false contracts," he said. "Vane thought the son carried what the father built." "What did my father build?" Gideon asked. "A way to open the archive without writing the full sequence anywhere." Elias looked toward Nix. "Sound and metal, one half remembered, one half carried." Gideon removed the alloy plate from its evidence sleeve. Its carved symbols had seemed like unit marks, but Owen joined through a secure video call and identified them as tonal spacing indicators. When combined with the 3 short, 2 long whistle, they formed the beginning of a longer access sequence. Elias suddenly seized Gideon's wrist. His grip was weak but desperate. "The blast wasn't meant to kill the whole team," he said. "Vane needed you gone with the key. Then why did you save me?" Elias studied his face as though searching through years of darkness. For once, no confusion entered his answer. "Because you were my brother." His hand released Gideon's wrist. Exhaustion pulled his eyes closed. Owen continued analyzing the sequence and found that the phrase, "where the light stopped turning," corresponded to a decommissioned naval relay site built into an old lighthouse on the Oregon coast. Nathan Rourke had worked there during its final modernization. Naomi looked at the coordinates appearing on the secure screen. "If the archive exists, Silas will know Elias am using, remember it." Gideon placed the alloy plate beside Nix's vest. The dog looked from Elias to him, waiting without understanding the words that had changed everything. For years, Gideon had believed the whistle called his team together before danger. Now he knew it had been designed to open the truth after they were gone. The decommissioned lighthouse stood on a black cliff above the Oregon coast, its white stone tower weathered gray by salt, rain, and 30 years without maintenance. Waves struck the rocks below with enough force to send mist over the lower windows. The beacon at the tower's summit had stopped rotating long before Gideon Rourke entered the Navy, yet the old lens remained visible behind cracked glass, frozen toward the western horizon. Gideon stood at the locked service gate shortly before midnight, rain darkening the shoulders of his complete green digital camouflage uniform. The matching blouse remained fully buttoned over his disciplined athletic build, his trousers properly fitted above plain black combat boots. He wore no helmet, armor, weapon, patches, or tactical equipment. His angular, clean-shaven face appeared carved from the same stone as the tower, but his cold blue-gray eyes carried the strain of knowing that his father had hidden something here and died without ever explaining why. Nix waited beside him beneath a tan tactical K9 vest, rain gathering along his deep fawned mahogany coat. The 5-year-old Belgian Malinois held his lean, muscular frame steady against the wind, his upright ears constantly adjusting, and his dark amber eyes following movements rather than scenery. Marin Bell kept the working lead short. Her auburn hair had been secured beneath the collar of her Navy veterinary coat, and rain dotted the fair skin and freckles across her face. Elias Rowe sat in the rear of Naomi Vale's vehicle, wrapped in a dark medical blanket over his pale gray shirt and simple dark trousers. At 42, he looked far older, his narrow frame weakened by years of confinement, his dark blonde hair prematurely silver, and pale scar tissue climbing from his left neck toward his jaw. His left hand trembled even while resting in his lap. "You should be in the hospital," Gideon told him. Elias looked toward the motionless beacon. His light brown eyes remained tired and uncertain, but recognition lived beneath the confusion. "I know the door," he said. "I don't know if I know what comes after it." Naomi Vale stepped between them carrying a hard evidence case. She wore her charcoal blazer beneath a black weatherproof coat, with a white blouse, black trousers, and low leather shoes. Her straight shoulder-length hair had been tied back for the first time, exposing the sharp lines of her face. "The magistrate signed the search warrant at 2140, she said. "The property is held by a maritime preservation trust, but the sealed relay chamber remains under federal jurisdiction. My response team is 40 minutes behind us." "Why are we ahead of them?" Marin asked. "Because someone accessed the warrant system 11 minutes after it was approved." Naomi glanced toward the dark road. "The leak may be inside my own office. If Silas knows the location, 40 minutes may be enough for him to destroy everything." Owen Pike's voice emerged from a secure radio in Naomi's case. He had remained at the Federal Forensic Lab in Washington, where his compact, sturdy frame and reddish-brown beard were now bent over several monitors instead of a lighthouse door. "I isolated the access sequence from the Black Veil Drive," he said. "Your father's design was clever, Rourke. The whistle isn't a password. It establishes the timing intervals. The alloy markings provide the numeric order. Without both pieces, the system rejects the sequence." Naomi cut the corroded padlock under the authority of the warrant. Inside, the lighthouse smelled of wet stone, rust, and old electrical insulation. A spiral staircase climbed around the inner wall. Each gust made the metal supports groan. Gideon felt the sound inside his chest. For a moment, the tower became the damaged concrete corridor from the final mission, where metal screamed as the ceiling collapsed. He stopped at the bottom step. Nix looked back. The Malinois did not touch him or behave as though he understood Gideon's memory. He simply waited, balanced and alert, offering the same steady presence he had given in the Black Veil tunnel. Gideon placed one hand on the cold railing and followed. They reached the former lantern room after a slow climb. The giant Fresnel lens occupied the center like a cathedral window abandoned by its congregation. Elias walked around it uncertainly, touching the metal frame with his trembling hand. "The light stopped turning," he whispered. "Nathan said no one searches inside a machine they think is dead." Gideon's father had never been sentimental. Nathan Rourke had been a broad-shouldered naval communications engineer with dark hair, serious eyes, and the frustrating habit of hiding affection inside technical advice. He taught Gideon how to repair radios, read signal patterns, and distrust any system that claimed it could not fail. Gideon had believed those lessons were simply a father's way of preparing his son for military service. Now he wondered whether Nathan had been preparing him to finish something. Nix moved past the lens toward the eastern wall. He sampled the seams between metal plates, then stopped at one dark panel and sat. Marin removed the faded oilcloth from its evidence sleeve and held it several feet away. Nix checked the scent, returned to the same panel, and indicated again. "Similar oil compound," she said. "Someone handled this surface using the same lubricant preserved in the vest." Gideon removed the plate. Behind it was a compact terminal with no visible keyboard, only 5 pressure switches and a narrow slot shaped for the alloy strip. Naomi photographed the mechanism before Gideon inserted the metal. Owen guided them through the sequence. Gideon whistled 3 short notes and 2 long ones, establishing the intervals. The terminal illuminated. Symbols appeared on the screen. Elias watched, breathing unevenly, then raised his trembling hand and tapped 4 quick beats against the wall. The panel unlocked. Before the hidden door opened, Nix suddenly left the terminal and crossed to Elias. The dog pressed his head beneath Elias's shaking left hand, exactly as he had in the hospital when the second half of the code returned to him. Elias closed his eyes. "He did this before," he whispered. "In the dust. After the blast." Gideon moved closer. Elias's breathing became shallow, but this time the memory did not scatter. "You were on the road," he said. "The signal came from our own relay. I saw the detonator indicator." I shouted, "But you turned the wrong way." His fingers tightened gently in Nix's fur. "I pushed you into the drainage cut. The first charge took the convoy. The second was for anyone who survived." Gideon felt the missing moment return not as a full image, but as weight against his chest, Elias striking him from the side, sand rising, and a hand releasing his uniform as the world turned white. Elias opened his eyes. "I did not lead you into it, Gideon. I tried to get you out." 8 years of buried suspicion broke apart in the dark. Gideon placed one hand over Elias's shoulder. "I know," he said. For the first time, he truly did. The hidden door opened onto a narrow equipment chamber built inside the upper tower wall. Racks of offline storage modules stood behind waterproof shields. Nathan had designed the archive to remain physically disconnected until the correct acoustic and mechanical sequence activated it. That explained why Silas had never been able to erase it remotely. Naomi connected a forensic transfer unit while Owen verified the directory. Files appeared in layers: military shipment records, shell company accounts, procurement approvals, falsified loss reports, and lists of equipment diverted through combat zones. Haven Crest records documented unidentified veterans held under fraudulent guardianship. One folder contained reports written by Elias. Another listed payments to officers who had altered Gideon's final mission route. "This is enough to reopen every contract linked to Lantern," Naomi said. "Not if the tower loses power before you copy it," a calm male voice replied from the staircase. Silas Vane emerged into the Lantern room with 2 private security employees behind him. At 52, he remained tall and lean, his posture straight despite the climb. Silver hair was combed back from a long, clean-shaven face with high cheekbones and steel-gray eyes. He wore a dark charcoal suit, white shirt, black tie, and polished Oxford shoes beneath a raincoat that seemed untouched by the storm. Silas looked less like a man invading a lighthouse than an executive arriving late to a meeting. Neither guard displayed a weapon openly, but Gideon recognized the stiffness beneath their jackets. Naomi raised her credential. "Silas Vane, this site is under federal search authority. Order your people to step back." Silas's expression remained almost sympathetic. "Your warrant was obtained using testimony from a neurologically compromised man and a frightened nurse. You have mistaken damaged memories for truth." Elias stepped behind Gideon, his strength fading. Silas looked at him without surprise. "You always were difficult to erase." "You kept him drugged for years," Gideon said. "I funded treatment for a man who could not distinguish reality from trauma." Silas's voice never rose. "Ask him why your team was sent to that road. Ask him how long he knew the convoy was compromised." The accusation struck exactly where Silas intended. Gideon turned slightly toward Elias. The older man's face tightened as he struggled to assemble words. "I knew the manifest was wrong," he said. "Not the explosives." Silas gave a faint smile. How convenient that memory returns in pieces favorable to him. The security employee on the right shifted his hand beneath his jacket. Nix's ears snapped forward. The dog moved before the man fully drew the compact pistol, striking his forearm and driving him against the lens housing. The weapon fell across the floor. Nix pinned the guard by the shoulder, teeth gripping fabric without tearing into flesh. "Nix, hold." The Malinois froze under Gideon's command, maintaining pressure but not escalating. Marin pulled Elias behind the storage wall while Naomi kicked the weapon away and restrained the second guard with her own service sidearm. Silas stepped toward the archive controls. Gideon blocked him. The 2 men faced each other beneath the dead lighthouse lens while the storm shook the glass. "You think exposing these files restores the men you lost?" Silas asked. "It will only replace one lie with another. Nations survive because someone makes decisions soldiers are too sentimental to understand. You called murder logistics. I called it containment." The words were not a full confession, but Naomi's recorder captured them. More importantly, the documents behind Gideon already established the chain Silas had spent years denying. Owen's voice sounded over the radio. "Transfer at 68%. I can send the verified packages now, but the rest will take time." Naomi opened 3 encrypted channels. The complete forensic image went to the Office of Inspector General and a federal magistrate. A legally filtered package went to Lena Ortiz, an investigative journalist Naomi trusted to publish only documents stripped of operational secrets. Lena was 38, slender, with warm brown skin, shoulder-length black wavy hair, and intelligent dark eyes. She was known for refusing dramatic claims until she could verify records independently, which made her harder to manipulate than reporters who chased immediate headlines. Silas lunged for the power isolation lever. Elias, leaning against the panel, recognized the movement. With his trembling left hand, he struck a red mechanical lock. A steel cover dropped over the controls, sealing them. Silas turned toward him, anger finally breaking through his composure. The second guard twisted free of Naomi and reached for the fallen pistol. Nix released the first man and intercepted the movement, knocking the second guard down. Silas stumbled near the edge of the spiral stairs. For one instant, the dog stood within reach of him, body rigid, teeth exposed. Nix, back. The command cut through the room. Nix stopped. He returned to Gideon's side, breathing hard but obedient. Gideon refused to let Silas turn the dog's loyalty into an act of revenge. The lights suddenly died. Only the storm remained, roaring around the dark tower. Outside, rotor blades approached through the rain. Silas spoke from the darkness. "You think they are coming for me? There are people above me who will bury all of you before sunrise." Naomi activated a small emergency lamp. "The data has already left the building." Owen's voice confirmed it. 3 verified copies transmitted. He can't put them back in the dark. The helicopter's searchlight swept across the lantern room. Federal agents entered the lower tower and climbed toward them. Silas stood motionless beside the dead lens, his elegant appearance finally stripped of authority. Naomi placed him under arrest for obstruction, conspiracy, unlawful detention, and evidence tampering pending additional charges. Silas offered no resistance. As agents led him down the staircase, he looked once at Gideon. "This is larger than me." Gideon rested one hand against Nix's vest and the other on Elias's weakened shoulder. "Then we keep going." Dawn began to lighten the horizon by the time they emerged from the tower. Elias could barely stand, but he refused the stretcher until he saw the lighthouse behind him. The frozen lens caught the first pale sunlight and reflected it across the wet ground, not turning, not guiding ships, yet shining once more. Nix faced the same direction as Gideon. This time, neither of them was waiting for someone lost in the dark. They had brought the truth out with them. Silas Vane's arrest did not collapse Project Lantern overnight. It opened a door into a corridor crowded with sealed contracts, frightened witnesses, missing records, and officials who had spent years protecting themselves through layers of legal distance. During the months after the lighthouse operation, federal investigators searched Haven Crest, suspended its private administrators, froze accounts connected to Vane's strategic recovery, and identified several shell companies that had billed the government for treatments never authorized by patients or their families. Silas remained in custody, while his attorneys argued that the lighthouse files had been misinterpreted, that Elias Rowe was cognitively unreliable, and that Naomi Vale had allowed personal regret to contaminate a federal investigation. Naomi answered them with evidence rather than emotion. She preserved the original archive, documented every transfer, and separated classified military information from material that could be used in court. The investigation expanded slowly, one authenticated record at a time. Some officers were charged with falsifying mission orders and concealing unlawful transfers. Others resigned before questioning. Several powerful figures avoided immediate arrest, reminding Gideon Rourke that truth entering daylight did not mean justice moved quickly. Gideon spent much of that winter at his cabin outside Red Hollow, Montana. At 33, the former U.S. Navy SEAL still looked like a man prepared for deployment. Disciplined athletic build, rugged angular face, sharp jawline, clean-shaven cheeks, cold blue-gray eyes, and a modern short undercut with tightly faded sides and a textured top. He continued wearing his complete green digital camouflage uniform, the fully buttoned matching blouse, and properly fitted trousers held by a plain black belt above black combat boots. There were no medals, weapons, patches, or tactical accessories, only the restrained posture of someone who had once depended on uniformity to survive chaos. Yet the cabin around him had begun to change. The curtains were open during daylight. The rear door was sometimes left unchecked for an entire hour. A second chair stood beside the fireplace. That chair belonged to Elias. Elias had been released from the federal hospital under a supervised rehabilitation plan. At 42, he remained physically fragile, with a narrow frame, prematurely silver hair cut short, blonde gray stubble, pale burn scars running from his left neck toward his jaw, and a left hand that trembled whenever he was tired. He wore the same simple clothing selected for his recovery: a pale gray long-sleeved shirt, dark trousers, and brown slip-on shoes. His light brown eyes could be warm and alert in one moment, then uncertain the next. Some mornings he remembered Gideon immediately. On others, he woke believing they were stationed overseas and asked why the transport vehicles had not arrived. Living together was not the peaceful reunion Gideon had imagined during 8 years of grief. Gideon watched Elias too closely, followed him whenever he walked outside, and corrected every confused memory before Elias finished speaking. Elias resented being treated like a mission objective. Their arguments were quiet but sharp. "I can pour my own coffee," Elias said one morning after Gideon reached for the pot. "Your hand was shaking." "My hand always shakes." "You burned yourself yesterday, and today I might not." Gideon withdrew, ashamed but unable to explain that losing Elias once had made every small risk feel unbearable. Elias looked away, equally frustrated by a body and mind that no longer obeyed him. They had survived the same betrayal, but returned, carrying different prisons. Nix moved between those prisons without choosing one over the other. The 5-year-old male Belgian Malinois retained his lean muscular build, deep fawn to mahogany coat, distinct black facial mask, upright ears, and focused dark amber eyes. He continued wearing his tan tactical K9 vest and simple working dog collar. During the day, Nix followed Gideon while he repaired the fence or cut firewood. In the evenings, he rested beside Elias's chair. When Gideon woke from a nightmare, Nix lay near the couch until his breathing slowed. When Elias became disoriented and wandered toward the tree line searching for a convoy that no longer existed, Nix stepped in front of him, waited, and guided him back toward the porch. Nix did not heal either man by magic. He interrupted patterns. He gave them time to choose differently. Marin Bell visited twice each week to check Nix's physical condition and help Gideon understand his behavior. Her auburn hair remained tied low, her fair skin lightly freckled, and her green eyes calm beneath the practical fatigue of long workdays. She wore her navy veterinary coat over a light gray shirt, dark khaki trousers, and brown work shoes. Marin never treated Gideon's progress as a debt owed to her. When he apologized for not improving faster, she told him recovery was not a performance. When Elias forgot her name, she introduced herself again without pity. Their closeness developed through ordinary moments rather than sudden declarations. Marin stayed for coffee after examining Nix. Gideon repaired the heater at her rehabilitation center without being asked. Some evenings, all 3 humans sat in the cabin while Nix slept between them, and silence no longer felt like a threat. Ruth Calder entered federal witness protection after providing the medication schedules, falsified consent forms, and names of staff members who had obeyed illegal orders. Her testimony helped identify patients whose real names had been removed. Caleb Dunn was found alive in a roadside motel in Idaho, where he had been hiding under a false surname after helping Nix escape. The 31-year-old former Army mechanic was exhausted, underweight, and still walked with stiffness in his injured right knee, but his hazel eyes remained clear. His account confirmed that Elias had spent months teaching Nix scent and sound cues, never expecting the dog to understand the conspiracy, only to reach Black Veil and recognize Gideon. Owen Pike also testified. The 45-year-old former communications specialist appeared before investigators in a gray-brown flannel shirt, dark canvas jacket, black jeans, and old work boots. His reddish-brown beard was neatly trimmed, but his pale green eyes revealed how little he had slept. Owen admitted that he had erased Elias's transmission under direct orders. He expected Gideon to condemn him. Instead, Gideon found him outside the hearing room and said, "You followed an order designed to make decent men useful to bad ones." Owen lowered his head. "That doesn't bring anyone back." "No," Gideon replied, "but telling the truth may keep it from happening again." It was not complete forgiveness. It was the beginning of it. One night, in early spring, Gideon woke to find Elias's bed empty and the front door open. Panic seized him before reason could intervene. He ran outside expecting to see Elias lost among the trees. Instead, he found Elias standing in the yard beneath a sky full of stars. Nix sat beside him, both facing north. Elias held the old alloy plate in his trembling hand. "I remembered another name," Elias said. Gideon slowed. "Whose?" Elias looked toward him, tears reflecting the porch light. "Daniel Cho. He sang terribly whenever we repaired the bridge rig." Daniel had been the youngest member of their team, dead at 26. Gideon had not spoken his name aloud in years. Then Elias remembered another. Marcus Bell. Then Thomas Keene. The names came without order, interrupted by pauses and uncertainty. Nix remained seated between them, looking north, as he had once done from the rehabilitation kennel. Gideon realized Elias had not come outside because he was lost. He had come outside because pieces of the dead were finding their way home through him. The official memorial for Gideon's team was held 2 weeks later at a veterans' garden outside Red Hollow. A new wall of dark stone carried the names of those killed in the final mission, while an additional plaque acknowledged that their deaths had resulted from deliberate manipulation of military orders. Families gathered beneath a clear but cold sky. Some cried openly. Others stood with the rigid expressions of people who had waited too long for an apology that could never become a reunion. Gideon stood before the wall in his green digital camouflage uniform, his posture straight but his hands unsteady. Elias stood to his left, pale and thin in his gray shirt and dark trousers. Owen remained several steps behind them. Marin watched from beside the families. Nick stood at Gideon's right, alert and steady in his tan tactical vest, facing the same direction as the two former SEALs. A military representative invited Elias to speak. Elias approached the stone wall, but stopped when he saw the names. His light brown eyes moved from one inscription to another. The crowd waited. "I knew them," he began. His voice weakened. "I know I knew them." He reached the first name but could not connect it to a face. His breathing quickened. Shame pulled his shoulders inward. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I cannot remember all of you." He turned as if to leave. Nix moved toward the memorial. The Belgian Malinois lowered his nose to the line of identification tags placed beneath the wall by surviving families. He examined each one in turn, then sat beside the first tag and looked at Elias. It was not supernatural knowledge. Nix had once attended equipment checks, roll calls, and training sessions filled with the sense of those men and their gear. Something about the arrangement triggered an old routine. Elias stared at the first tag. "Danny?" he said. "Daniel Cho?" Gideon stepped beside him and read the full engraved name. Nix shifted to the next tag. "Marcus Bell," Elias whispered. "He carried pepper sauce everywhere." A quiet laugh broke through the tears among several relatives. Gideon read Marcus's name aloud. They continued together. Elias supplied fragments. A nickname, a bad song, a joke. The way one man cleaned his glasses before every briefing. Gideon provided full names and ranks. When both hesitated, Owen stepped forward and completed what they had forgotten. 3 survivors finished the roll call for the men who could not answer. After the ceremony, Elias stood before the wall alone. Gideon waited several feet away instead of watching over his shoulder. It was a small act of trust, but Elias noticed. He touched 2 fingers to the stone, then returned without assistance. By late spring, federal authorities placed Haven Crest under permanent independent administration. Families were contacted for patients who could be identified. Some reunions were joyful. Others were painful because years of medication and isolation could not be reversed. Silas remained imprisoned, awaiting trial on a growing list of charges. The wider network was still under investigation. Justice had begun, not finished. Gideon started attending a veterans support group in town. He rarely spoke during the first meetings, but he kept returning. He also began repairing homes for injured veterans with Owen and Caleb, giving both men a way to use skills once connected to guilt. Elias joined when he was able, usually sorting tools or fixing old radios at a workbench. Marin continued visiting, though she no longer needed a veterinary reason every time. One warm morning, Gideon repaired the fence outside the cabin, while Elias sat on the porch working on an old field radio. Nix rested in the center of the yard, sunlight warming his mahogany coat. The dog's eyes were partly closed, though his ears remained alert. A helicopter appeared beyond the valley. The sound reached them before the aircraft became visible. Nix lifted his head. Gideon's hands stopped against the fence post. Elias gripped the radio until his trembling fingers turned pale. For a moment, the past stood among them. Gideon left the fence and walked to Nix. He placed one hand gently against the tan K9 vest. Elias looked at them from the porch. Slowly, he released the radio and whistled 3 short notes, followed by 2 long ones. The old signal crossed the yard. Nix looked toward Elias, then toward Gideon. His tail struck the grass once. He lowered his head and rested again. The helicopter passed beyond the mountains. No one ran for cover. No one searched for an exit. No one was left behind. The signal that had once called them toward danger now meant something simpler. We are here. We found one another. We are home. Sometimes, God's miracles do not arrive with thunder, signs in the sky, or answers that come all at once. Sometimes, a miracle comes quietly in the loyalty of a dog, in the return of someone we thought was lost, or in the courage to take one more step after life has broken us. Gideon, Elias, and Nix remind us that healing does not mean forgetting the pain. It means learning that the pain no longer has to control where we go next. In our daily lives, we may carry wounds that no one else can see. We may feel forgotten, abandoned, or too damaged to begin again. But God can use the smallest act of kindness, the most unexpected friendship, or even an animal's faithful heart to lead us back toward hope. Perhaps the miracle is not that every wound disappears. Perhaps the miracle is that, even after everything we have lost, God still gives us someone to walk beside us, a reason to keep believing, and another chance to find our way home. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Tell us in the comments what this story meant to you and where you are watching from. Subscribe to Navy SEAL and K9 Stories so you can join us for more stories about courage, loyalty, faith, and second chances. May God protect you, strengthen you through every difficult season, and bless you and your loved ones with peace, hope, and faithful companions along the journey.